Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Black Talk Platform, and I am your host, Dr. Deborah D. Jenkins. For everything on this platform is about Blackness, and we are so happy to have you join us this evening with my special guest, Miss Pamela Denise Long. She is a business consultant. She is a contributor to Newsweek, and I didn't put it on the flyer, but she also is a contributor to the Hill. If is that correct? Is it the
Yes.
Hill?
Yeah, Hill TV, a rising.
Hill TV. And you know, I am a huge encourager of different news outlets. And that is one that I've been enjoying. But I haven't yet seen Pamela Denise on there yet. But she is my guest, and she's a very special guest because, and I know I say that often, today marks the second anniversary of Black Talk Platform. And I am so excited to have you as my guest tonight, Denise. And we do call her Denise. That is the name she goes by. But let me tell you why it's so special. Hi, welcome, welcome. Come on in, and we're happy to have you here. That's my sister. She's like one of the first people always in.
Nice.
Um, but let me say why this is such a special occasion to have Pamela Denise Long on with me tonight. First, we met as we were a part of a large contingency of Black people doing our part to save Mason, Tennessee. And you heard us talk about it. If you've watched that special dedicated program, Denise was one of the guests, as well as the mayor of the city of Mason, Tennessee, and one of the organizers, KD, who has fundraised through the GoFundMe. But that's how Denise and I met, through that movement, which is continuing on. But Black Talk Platform grew out of my activism on the streets against police brutality, against Black bodies, and wherever activism took me. But it came at a point at which the pandemic had struck the entire world, and I still had this voice that I wanted to have heard. I could not be out in the streets any longer because my mother was ill, and it just wasn't safe. Even though there were millions of people all around the world protesting, I couldn't do that. I had to protect my mother and my entire family, and even myself.
Mhm.
So I started this digital activism through Black Talk Platform, dedicating it to everything that concerns the Black community. And I have to say, even Black Talk Platform, me, the host of Black Talk Platform, I've matured in these 2 years because it really was an outgrowth. There's been a fundamental change in me since 2016 with the election of um, Donald Trump, right? But guess what? This is why it's so important that Denise is on with me tonight. There's a fundamental change in me in 2016 with his election. It just showed me people in a different light, and what their motivations are. We can go on and on, but this is not a show dedicated to animus against him, right? That's gone. He's no longer here. The election of our current president, Joseph Biden, also ushered in a change in me personally. I did not vote for him, but I am a lifelong Democratic voter. I have never always voted down ballot because I reserve the right to vote as I see is beneficial to me and my family and the Black community. My primary concern is with how we are treated. Currently, the Democrats hold the White House and both branches of the legislative arm of government. There are three branches, of course, we all know. But what I found is that we're not being served well by having that much power, that much authority. It's as if Black people who have made this country have been forgotten when they have this power. And Denise has different viewpoints, and I've opened myself up to different viewpoints because everyone knows who comes through Black Talk Platform, I am unapologetically Black, meaning that if it's going to harm us, I'm not going to do it, but I will raise a flag about it. But if it's going to help us, I will present it to you so that you can begin to consider thinking in a different way. And so she has come up with this incredible plan. She's a very highly intelligent person. I watch her tweets all the time now that we are in each other's sphere, and I learn from her. And I watch her followers. Her followers respect her. She doesn't hold her tongue, similar to me, right? Similar to me, just lets it out. But she has a little more decorum than I do. I will say that. But I wanted you to be here tonight, so that you can talk to us about this 3-point plan and share with us a little bit about the Coalition for Concerned Freedmen, and how the plan was developed. Please treat the audience even as elementary as you need, because even for the Black community, the word freedman, sadly, is not one that we use often. And I use B1 all the time. So feel free to educate as you begin to explain to us why the Coalition for Concerned Freedmen came up with this plan and why you thought it was important.
Well, Dr. Jenkins, thank you for having me here and for everything that you shared, and happy anniversary on Black Talk platform. So that's really important. I think it's also important, I'll say this before I answer your question, that we do talk about Black Americans' experience with both the election of Donald Trump as well as the ascendancy, the rise and reappearance of Joe Biden, and what his year and almost a half in the presidency has meant to Black Americans, the impact that he's had on Black Americans. It's important to process that stuff so that we, more than any other people, can remain engaged in the political process, because there are so many opportunities for us to become disengaged because of the lack of representation that we have experienced for a long time. So I do think that's important. So in regard to the 3-point plan, so I have only officially joined one party my entire life where I pay dues and stuff like that. And that would be the Republican Party. I originally joined either in 06 or 07. I recall that it was around the time for Obama's first campaign. And for some reason, his campaign, and this is, I'm not slinging mud when I say this, but I mean this literally, it feels like his campaign lasted for a couple of years. To me, it seemed longer than the typical campaign. I think it was because of the energy around his ascendancy, talking about him as a potential first Black president. So there was a lot of press and a lot of media related to this Barack Obama guy coming out of Illinois, right? But I did join the party then because I did not anticipate that Obama, because of his own words and all of those things, would be dedicated to Black Americans. And I felt that his presidency would be used to help other things happen that weren't focused on Black people, but he would be used in order to push them. And I think that's exactly what happened from a social policy perspective. And so I will say that it was a struggle in some ways to remain connected to the party, because while there was fervor, excitement on the side of Black people, including people who'd survived the civil rights and Jim Crow, to see this energy, to see the first Black president, there was also this vitriol that happened on the right that got to be very toxic, right? Where his race and his birthplace and his religion, or alleged, right, connections to religion, and legitimate because of his stepfather's religion, was just brought to the fore in very unskilled ways. So I remain connected at this point with the Republican Party because over these years, I have not seen that Democrats have delivered. And I still see that many Black Americans hold conservative principles in many ways, but we are in this tension around being afraid for our voting rights, racism, people negatively affecting us if they get power on the right, and Democrats being this protector that all it does is allegedly keep us from the boogeyman on the right. It doesn't provide and has not provided direct policies that directly benefit freedmen. And so recognizing that if we are values aligned in many ways with the right of the spectrum, and part of the reason the gallant old party, the GOP, gained legitimacy is because of its commitment to America as as an institution, as a place, as a government where descendants of slaves, which is freedmen, that's the status we got after going from being legally slaves, right, to being legally free, freedmen. That's how they got their legitimacy. And so my call to action for myself in terms of my political footprint, and I'm sorry to go long-winded,
No,
but
fine.
in terms of my political footprint and what I am calling other freedmen and other Americans and other people on the right and the middle to come into is the fact that we can't continue in a country where people can campaign around the exclusion of freedmen. America has become more perfect only, and I do mean only, through the trajectory and the lived experience of freed people, both our ancestors who were literally slaves over with whom the country fought, right? And our ancestors who survived the period between the dismantling of Reconstruction in the late 1800s through Jim Crow and into civil rights. That is how our nation lived up to the poetry on paper, is through us, through our ancestors, and even through our experience today. So to recognize that, honor that, I call for the Republican Party in particular to live up to its legacy. And I called for freedmen to demand that the Republican Party live up to its legacy by not waiting for people to provide us a platform, to provide us talking points, to provide a Black agenda to us, but for us to provide it to them. And so the 3-point plan is designed to be 3 overarching points. That pull together several needs under this umbrella of the 3 points. I'm going to pause there.
Okay, great. So I'm processing the approach. And I actually, you wrote something, but I didn't get a chance to fully read it. So I won't really go into it. But I did see a prominent pastor who was also a prominent supporter of 45. I'm in New York. And so Blacks here in New York, the majority of us do not have positive feelings about the former president. And I am one of those people who really don't like to use his name. And so that's why I refer to him like that. It's just how we are in New York. Just to let you know. But so I'm listening to you say this about presenting a plan to the Republicans to have them, to encourage them, or to have them, or to desire for them to live up to their legacy around their commitment, rather, to the nation. And I'm asking, do you think that there's a better chance for them to do that? Because I'm thinking about the pastor, and he's prominent and has a lot of influence. And if presented with your 3-point plan, he could possibly very easily persuade his congregation and those with whom he has influence, including those within the party leadership. Are you saying that you believe it's easier for us to go to the Republicans with such a plan that Denise will roll out for us in a minute than it is to the Democrats?
Here's what I would say to that. The plan has been shared with multiple people, both campaigning to be elected, as well as influencers and people who are a degree of separation from a number of prominent folk. I have found in sharing the plan with that array of people that it resonates, including the component about reparations. No one has said, ooh, reparations. No, that doesn't mean they don't feel that way. They haven't said it to me, the multiple people that I presented it to. I believe that the scramble, I believe that the party affiliations, the left and the right and the like, are scrambled and mixed, right? I think that there are people who are not committed to doing anything specific for Black Americans on the left and on the right. And for me, as I look at the plan and what I think is most important, I do believe that the plan as laid out is more adaptable to Republicans than Democrats. So let's talk about the plan. There are 3 points. It's called the 3-point plan to unite America, and it has 3 overarching themes. The first theme there, and I should say, for those who are listening and want to pull it up and look at it in its entirety on their computer or whatever, you can find it on my blog on Medium, and the address to that is Pamela Denise Long. So my whole name, Pamela Denise Long .medium.com. So it's called the 3-point plan to unite America. You should find it with scrolling through the page. But the first point there is about law and order, responsibility, and accountability. So what I have heard the Black community say over these years, from Trayvon Martin through Michael Brown to present day, right, George Floyd and the like, is that we want public safety. Who doesn't, right? We all want to be safe and secure in our communities. And at the same time, we want law enforcement that is also responsible and accountable. This whole demand for the organic demand, right, for Black Lives to Matter, not talking about the organization, just for clarity, but for Black Lives to Matter, is for law enforcement in their interactions with Black people to have a sense of honor and accountability for their actions, right? And so that first point is really acknowledging the ways there is a balance of personal responsibility, community responsibility, and systemic responsibility. And we can't have law and order if the people who are supposed to be providing security, safety, patrolling, enforcing laws are themselves behaving in ways that are not honorable and that are not orderly, that are out of control. So that is, generally speaking, what law and order, married to responsibility and accountability. And it's really important to note that those 4 elements have to go together if we're actually going to achieve anything related to police community trust, community policing, which people often talk about, if we're going to have really solid relationships with the people who patrol and provide service, public service to our communities. Should I stop there? Do you have questions about the first point?
I do, because this one is one that is dear to me, because I do a lot of work around police reform. And I think the way you have laid it out with the accountability as well as responsibility is incredibly important. I feel as if we are often put in a position where we have to choose either or, and our safety is not the one that we choose. It is the punitive response that is often necessary after harm has been caused to our community by law enforcement. And I don't think it has to be either or. I think it should be both and. New York City, since day one of Mayor Eric Adams' administration, has literally been on fire, and the violence is just grieving me. It's really grieving me, because I think about our young people. I think about what the mayor keeps saying, these ghost guns. In fact, there was a murder in my town, my city, overnight. The suspect had been arrested a month ago, This has nothing to do with bail reform, another thing that gets messed up in terms of the conversation. But he was arrested a month ago. I don't know why he was out, but it could possibly be for bail reasons. I don't know. But I believe they said that if he's the suspect used a ghost gun. And that's what the mayor has been talking about constantly. And so while during the primaries, I did not support Mayor Adams because of different reasons. There were other candidates, right? But I do support his approach. You can't ask someone who was a cop to no longer be a cop. I mean, it's just, and that's why a lot of people didn't support him. And so I feel that we get pushed into a corner to choose when we actually need both. We need until somebody comes up with a better idea. And I don't know that there is one right now. I know how law enforcement came to be what we know it today to be, but when I think about that whole horrible campaign called Defund the Police, it was a horrible term that really distracted us all from what we really needed to be concerned about. It was it was a term, I would say, by rich white liberals such as Barbara Streisand, who I don't believe was ever poor in her life because her father was Hollywood gold, right? And she lives in the Hamptons where the security is not an issue for mega rich people. You don't get to throw out terms into communities in the inner cities like New York and Chicago, Philadelphia, and LA, and let people gravitate towards those when you know that that is not really what needs to happen. So I like the fact that you have been thoughtful. You and the concerned freedmen have been thoughtful about both and. But how are people receiving this? Because we are often put into these two corners.
Yeah, so there have been, so after I wrote this, I sent it to folks for feedback, right? So, and there were a couple things that folks would say. One, it's like, why is Law and Order the first bullet? Because it's like, that sounds very tough on crime, police black bodies and jail them, right? Which is why it's been so important to really emphasize that there are 4 factors here: law and order, and responsibility and accountability for all stakeholders involved. And that definitely includes the law enforcement apparatus. And if you notice in the plan, I talk about both police, I talk about policing, I talk about the incarceration process pre-trial and incarceration after trial, because it all matters in terms of quality of life and impact. So, but overall, people have appreciated the fact that those 4 factors are married. And it's not just talking about lock them up, throw away the key. It's also really recognizing what I'd said before, which is that if we're going to have community safety and honor in the profession, and a give and take, and a feel that law enforcement is a part of the community and that they are held to account when they abuse or misuse the significant power, right, that they have, that they are held to account. So there's been an appreciation for that. Okay. I think one of the things that a thing that we really need to do as a broader American community is to have a nuanced, honest conversation about the balance between personal responsibility and systemic responsibility. You mentioned earlier, for crime and things like that. You mentioned earlier this idea that we have to choose one or the other. And that so much of the rhetoric, and I don't know where it comes from, the reporting, if this is how people just generally think, that it is all one thing or the other thing. And I tend to see that it is some extent one and the other. It is some extent both this and that. And depending on what the topic is, it's more of one thing than another, but it's usually a mix of things. And I think that complexity gets lost when people think that it has to be Black Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, right? Or, and it has to be All Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter. I mean, some of that I think is just knee-jerk I don't feel like I'm included, and you're saying you're more important than I am. And some of it is an intentional manipulation
Sure.
of the narrative, right? But I do think some of it is an honest either or way of thinking. And I would love for the American population to, my ideals, to develop a greater tolerance. Gray areas doesn't seem like the right word, but a greater tolerance for the both and, a greater tolerance and an instinct to pursue the fuller explanation rather than the explanation that you just automatically come to.
Yeah, and it's you know what, I don't even know if it's automatic in that in the sense that I believe it's a manipulation that
Mm-hmm.
is just been given or had over time to the point where it does seem like it's automatic. You
Mm-hmm.
know, we only know how to respond in this particular way, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Um so it's something that I think a lot of conversation has to be had around, because I think that the feelings about law enforcement are so embedded deeply. Even
Mm-hmm.
when we have a lot of representation in many cases of Blacks in law enforcement, um, often people like myself will say, you know, look, I have family who are in law enforcement. And it's true for many of us. But at the end of the day, stop harming us unjustly. And that really does lead the way with me,
Mm-hmm.
but I am able to go deeper. Like, you know, I have a son, and many people have children, and it's not even just a son anymore, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
also my daughter, you know, and Sandra Bland's case really amplified that for us in
Right.
our minds, right? But, you know, until we no longer as Black people have to give our children separate instructions about how to behave or conduct themselves
Mm-hmm.
around law enforcement, there has to be an emphasis on the harm caused, but also at the same time, the responsibility that we have to bring to it. And so I think if we can have more and more of these conversations, and like you said, they will be nuanced because people don't consider them, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and we can get to the table. It's like if somebody like myself could ever meet with Pat Lynch, the president of the NYPD's PBA
Mm-hmm.
officers, that would be major. You
Mm-hmm.
know, people like myself and other activists would meet with someone like him. But I can tell you this: when it was crazy at the beginning of the year, I mean, just seemed like stuff after stuff after stuff, and he came out. This was just days after the mayor was inaugurated. Pat Lynch came out and begged the community to help him. It was after the officers were murdered, which
Mm-hmm.
is really crazy. And that was not your typical type situation, but some will make it seem as if it was. And so I think that that's where, when you say we need to have these conversations come in, and we look at the parts of it and not just the side that we are accustomed to taking. So I like the fact that it's there, because we won't have anything if we're not alive. So I do get it. I get the order. So you can go on.
No, no, that's good. And thank you for sharing that. You know, you mentioned meeting with I think you called him captain. That, you know, I had this conversation in a Twitter exchange the other day about the George Floyd Policing Act, and the act that Tim Scott, a Republican from South Carolina, had also come up with. And
Along with Cory Booker.
yeah, and so, and they apparently got into loggerheads about it, and couldn't come to some kind of compromise, which is fascinating. But so, you know, there's been this debate about qualified immunity, and I understand why it is there. Um, and I think people miss the larger point. The larger point is when you do something untoward, like you shoot somebody, you know, you and five cops shoot somebody 60 times, like that's excessive, right? You roll up on a car or a kid in a park who's playing with a gun, and you don't even put your car in park, you just jump out and shoot them. That's a problem, right? I don't even have to touch qualified immunity as a standard on the book. What you did disqualifies you from immunity, right? And so we keep having these conversations about things as if they have to go away. No, it's how you're applying what is on the books that is the problem. And so, since the Fraternal Order of Police, apparently in March, I saw they issued the March of 21. I believe they issued a letter saying they disagreed with the act because it had qualified immunity in it, and then apparently qualified immunity was taken out by September, and everything got derailed. They issued a statement with a sister organization saying that they support it. I want to see then regulations, standards of practice from the Fraternal Order of Police on their own, based on their own organizational values that they stated in September of 21, related to the implementation of qualified immunity. Right. So, and that's where I think we need to be demanding. You came out with this public statement that, you know, you supported it because qualified immunity was taken out. But do you think that the person who shot Tamir Rice is justified? Do you think that Derek Chauvin should have qualified immunity applied to him? The reality is you don't. Therefore, I want to see nuanced implementation guidance from your organization about how qualified immunity should apply to officers and what your codes of conduct are, so that when you exercise qualified immunity as an officer, it's exercised with honor. That is the whole point. These people keep having us fighting for these footballs as if it has to be one thing or the other. What it boils down to ultimately is, how are you implementing the thing that is on the paper? And let's stop trying to get it all the way erased from the paper and focus on the implementation of it. That is a lot of what I'm talking about in this law and order, responsibility and accountability piece. And I'm also elevating there the mental health piece, mental health in the community, because many times police are called for social care. You know, do a wellness check, right, on someone who's mentally ill. And if someone is having a mental illness episode and they are paranoid, and you knock on or bang on their door, or they're outside in the midst of an episode and you roll up with a gun, you're going to feel threatening to them. Who knows what they're even seeing or experiencing in their mind? So the conditions themselves can lead to physical harm, because police officers can protect themselves if they feel dangered and be justified in any use of force when the setup itself lends itself toward use of force. So there are just some ways that there needs to be practices that support mental health responses to people in the community. And there also need to be ways that we protect and elevate the mental health of police officers. Can you imagine being in a profession where, I'm going to say 7 times out of 10, when you get a call, right? And I don't know the exact number, but let's just say 7 times out of 10, or even 50% of the time, the call that you get is from somebody on some real mess. They're violent, they're abusive, you're rolling up on a crime scene, people cussing you out, wanting to spit on you. That takes a toll on a person. Imagine doing that 50 hours a week for a year, 2, 3. And so I am not saying we excuse the behavior because the job is hard. Don't misinterpret it as that. What I am saying is we need to recognize that there are ways that the people who have chosen to do this profession honorably may also be affected. Their mental health might be affected by doing the profession. And instead of endangering those who have integrity, endangering their professional trajectory, we should also be able to provide them the mental health supports that they need without endangering their economic stability, income, career path, and the like. Now, if they need to retire and they can no longer do this job because they're not fit for duty psychologically, that's a whole nother thing. But if a person needs to process the trauma scene that they rolled up on that keeps playing out in their head for 2 months, then we need to have the space where that person, who is otherwise an honorable, decent person who's doing the job right, we need to get them the support they need, because we need those type of people doing the work in many ways.
Oh no, absolutely, absolutely. The suicide rate amongst cops is extremely high. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, actually, I'm very active with community building between law enforcement in New York City and the
Mm.
community, and I know many officers, many of them, I mean, honestly, they're not all bad, and the cases that we see elevated, they're the really worst of the worst, but it is a necessity to rein it in before it really spreads throughout the whole force, because as many people know, just like Wall Street, as Wall Street goes, so does the economy of the world.
Mm.
Same with law enforcement. As the NYPD goes, so does every other law enforcement agency in the country.
Mm.
But in regards to qualified immunity, I just have to say this. I have to say this. Um, they worked. They tried to work. I commend both senators, Scott,
Mm.
South Carolina, Booker from New Jersey, in their efforts. But there was a congressman who inserted himself, which they can all be asked questions. But there was a congressman from the state of South Carolina who inserted himself into the discussion
You're
as
talking
they
about
were.
Clyburn?
I'm going to get there. I was trying to build up
Okay.
to it and
Okay.
trying to
Sorry.
be
Sorry.
nice.
Put it
No,
on out there.
she's absolutely right. She knows I'm talking about Congressman Jim Clyburn. And I know that when people start hearing me, because Denise, I may have told you, I'm doing this whole report card on the CBC.
Oh,
He's
okay.
Yeah, it'll be out soon, mid-month,
Cool.
because we have a primary in October in on Ohio, I believe tonight, and then
Mm.
the others are coming up in May and in this month and in June. But and his is one that there's a lot of traction around, even though he has so much money. He could just, whatever. He inserted himself into the debate as they were really trying to iron things out, the senators, and he says, "Oh, qualified immunity is not a deal breaker." I
Mm-hmm.
will never forget that interview. I don't remember who was interviewing him, but that is what he said.
Mm-hmm.
And soon after the fraternal order, or around the same time, of police or in law enforcement, they came out with their position about it. Um, I think there's some danger there. There's so much danger because their authority and ability to change the trajectory of what we need to happen can be detrimental to us ultimately. Um,
Yeah.
there was a recently, and I know most about New York, of course. There was an officer who killed another officer. They were
Dating or something?
dating. They were
Yeah.
they were ex girlfriends. I just saw about a week or so ago that her family is suing the NYPD and the girl and the other officer, an officer who killed her. She's suing. They're suing. And guess what? I feel totally that the NYPD will settle this case. They have settled so many cases, so they could stop misusing taxpayer money if qualified immunity was a part of was a reality in their disciplinary actions. When we think about the murderer of Eric Garner, uh,
Mm. Mm.
he went on, and this is under Bill De Blasio. He went on to earn six figures
Mm-hmm.
before the NYPD finally said, "Okay, we're going to give him the boot." But he's been there. I don't believe they took his pension from him. He was
Mm.
able to murder Eric Garner. We saw it on camera, and stay on his job.
Mm-hmm. I think
Not
he also got a promotion.
He got a promotion, not actually fighting crime because he was administrative.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't even risking his life like his colleagues were every day when they put on their uniforms. And then he is finally fired. This is ridiculous. And so there needs to, I feel like, just like with other things, there needs to be some punitive response. And so this is one that will continue to be debated, but I do believe, like you do, that we do need to look from both at both sides. And I know we spent a lot of time on that one. Can you share with us, introduce the second one for us? The second.
Yeah. So, and thank you for that. And there's so much that could be discussed. I'd invite everybody to take a look at the plan itself and the bullet points. So the second area is an Americanizing education. And I'll go ahead and just read the third one. It's an All Americans First agenda. So the second one, an Americanizing education. So the other thing I should say is so people have been asking me as a Republican, like, what is it that Black people want, right? Like, what is it Black Americans want from, like, in general, and out of the Republican Party, but also, like, I also felt a need to codify in some written form what those things were. Then Rick Scott came out with his 11-point plan. I read through it, and there were parts where I said, this is a good point. This is a good point. And I was like, there's some parts where I thought, eh. And then there were other parts that made me cringe to think that someone in this age and stage of our country and at this time in our nation, for example, would think that a colorblind approach is just going to up and happen by not taking demographic information on forms. It requires far more than that in order for us to get there. Because if that's the case, we could have done that back in 1960 for civil rights, right? It takes more than that. And I thought it was a bit irresponsible of him to even present that as a plausible thing to do. But part of his plan spoke about education and, this idea that we're going to force our students to be patriotic. That's not how that works. Right. We actually develop social cohesion and a sense of patriotism through a mutual love and social contract between our country and its people, right? And so part of what Black America has had to continue to ask is for some reciprocity in that relationship and for that social contract to enfold us, not in a colorblind, I don't see your race kind of way, but in a way that honors what freedmen have contributed to the nation. So this Americanizing education piece speaks to both Rick Scott's and so many others' ideas about how we're going to get to patriotism and cohesion in America, as well as this moment in time where where people are having this sort of crazed moment around attacking critical race theory, which I'm not a champion of per se, but the reality is that race has been a significant component to the structure of America and how people experience it. And you can't deny that and actually live in the real world. So the Americanizing education sort of speaks to those things, and it calls all of these things are calls to action to the Republican Party to actually implement these things in practice, right? Part of that is to tell the whole story of how we got to be the United States of America. Some people got their stuff jacked and stolen, right, for us to be over here. Some people got enslaved for 250 years and then discriminated against for another 150. In between emancipation and civil rights, we had a whole bunch of European immigrants coming over who got a lot of free stuff, and the government helped to develop the country by giving away land in the West, and there are people who were excluded. If that's critical race theory, I don't know. It just sounds like history to me, and I don't think we should be ashamed of that. I don't think shame and guilt helps us do anything. I would like us to see where we name our reality, the beauty of it, the ugly of it, the hurt of it, the trauma of it, but also the healing of it, and to tell that on ourselves and to do that with our whole chest, as the people say, because this lie that somehow it's a different story than what it is getting us nowhere. So that's the call to action.
Yeah, I the whole not to shame them. The reality is they're not ashamed. Okay, they are very happy with what they have been able to steal and monetize. While people like you and I, or people who look like you and I, have struggled, and it really just It drives me crazy because it's not enough for them to come up with bullet points, because that healing point will never be materialized if they don't admit what they've done. I mean, really, I had the chairperson of the California Reparations Task Force on last week,
Mm.
Camilla V. Moore. And on my YouTube, because this is live on Facebook, YouTube, and on Twitter right now. The next day, some troll came on, a Caucasian man came on and saying, "Yeah, you just want to take everything that we worked for. Are you serious right now?" And see, that's the point. That's the discussion that does need to be had, because there will be no peace. There will be no healing if those who have been dominant in this country as a result of taking from those who were already here don't admit it. It's not really about shame. It's about admission. One thing I constantly teach is that there can be no reconciliation without repentance. I'm a church person, right?
Mm.
So you can't just say I forgive you. You can't seek forgiveness without admitting what you have done wrong. There is no forgiveness in that situation if I don't admit what I'm wrong about. And so no, they have to do more. They really have to do more. Now, one thing that I noticed with education, one of the Republican talking points is, you see, it's mostly the Democratic led cities that have the worst problems educationally. And they're not totally wrong, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not incorrect. But like you said, you would like to see from the Fraternal Order of Law Enforcement, let us see your plan for addressing the issue of qualified immunity. Tell us what these Democratic led cities can do differently to enhance the academic experience of Black children in this country. It's not enough for you to point out these things and have no solutions. Bring the solutions. And that's what has been missing with the Republicans. And one of the reasons why they're not growing, but they're just maintaining their base pretty much. And I know they have had a lot of the independents come over between the 2016 and the 2020 election, or actually maybe the one right before. But do you understand what I'm saying? It's not about not shaming them, and it's not about necessarily shaming. They should be shamed. They should be ashamed.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. It's not that there were things, some of the things that happened, a lot of the things that happened were shameful.
Mhm.
However, what I have seen being a consultant, a trainer, and a writer and a researcher, and having talks with people in schools and listening to the other professionals who do this work, plenty of people, plenty of white folks especially, and including some Black people, feel that this whole thing about anti-racism and critical race theory is about making white people feel bad. They are missing the point. And at the same time, there are ways that I have seen people who have huge contracts with school districts come in, and their focus is on making white folks who ain't there yet at the level of understanding they are feel bad about the fact that they aren't there yet, right? That's not helpful. It's not helpful in many ways, because is that the point, right? And I get it. We all go through our process of anger and all the other things, but there are some ways that people have shown up, professionals who are facilitating the anti-racism work, that is just not helpful to the ultimate goal of enlightening people into our history, what it means, and more importantly, where do we go today to get the outcome that what we are looking for, which should be for Black students and Black professionals to feel and experience a sense of community that keeps them engaged with the educational process and has outcomes that affect graduation rates, dropout rates, a sense of belonging in the school to keep them engaged. That should be the ultimate goal. So there's critique to be had on both sides. And I would say, I've been a professor in schools, college, and prepared teachers pre-service. I have never been a teacher of record in a school, but I have subbed in schools in many places across the economic spectrum. And there is and this is a conversation we need to have, there is a notable difference of the lived experience of many professionals in urban, predominantly Black environments compared to suburban environments. Now, the basic person would say, oh, it's Black parents and it's the Black community and it's all of those types of things, while not also recognizing the mounds and heaps of trauma and arrest of people's parents and the harassment that children see both in the community as well as from authority figures across health and human services that really do contribute to the psychological, I think, the psychological development and impact on people. So here I'm talking about trauma and trauma-informed practices. Again, that doesn't mean that people get a pass because of the trauma, but it does mean that it has to be taken into account, because what does it mean for the structure of schools if that is part of the issue, right? So telling parents that they need to be better parents is not the whole of the solution or even the best way to even communicate that, right? Because is that the point, just to shame parents, or is the point to provide structures that are supportive for children and to be educated and parents to be able to be engaged in education? So how about we stop arresting daddies, right? How about we stop putting people in jail because they can't pay child support? How about we stop putting out arrest warrants for parking tickets that people can't pay because they're also discriminated against because their name is Shanika or Dwayne Johnson, and the name discrimination that goes on. So it's not a simple solution that's just within education. It cuts across things like how law enforcement interacts with educational outcomes, for example. And for me, that's not about, oh, you making excuses for Black people. No, it's about me wanting to get to the ultimate goal is what is going to get us there? Helping children stay engaged and helping their parents participate in their education and probably heal some trauma along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're doing the heavy lift with your 3-point plan, right? Because we barely get to these tangibles that you're presenting tonight, and I think that's really good. Again, audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We have leaders listening. I'm so happy to have you all here. We have educators here. We have church leaders. We have business leaders here. We're so happy to have you all here. And I do these shows not for entertainment, but for us to be stronger as a community. And I try to find and curate the best of the best who are out there doing the work. And Denise is one of those people. And I'm so happy having you here. And she's not even done yet. We're winding down, but there's the other point. And one thing that Denise and I have in common, and we hope that other Blacks will too, and those who have the power to affect this, is our demand for reparations for our people. That that has to become critical. And when I was sharing at the top of the program that after the election of Biden and having three branches, two of the three branches of government in their control. And you know what, Denise, you were so nice because you just sort of kept it to discussing the George Floyd and Policing Act. But the reality is it wasn't just about the fact that it broke discussions and negotiations broke down between Scott and Booker. It's that there was no will from this president. There was no will from the Congressional Black Caucus to ensure that it was passed. And, it's the truth. And I think that we are at a point where we have to face, we're not being properly represented when we are voting in such large numbers for Democrats and we do it down ballot. I have to remind people that we were told to vote as if our life depended on it. And that has been a source of sometimes anger, but definitely a thorn in my side since I heard it from so many people, from people that we respect. And I feel like they take advantage of our respect for them, their authority, and their influence in our lives. And we get what we got. That's what we got right now. What we got.
Yeah. So, you said so many things that are so rich. No, it's good. I love it. I love it. I just want to, I want to honor the time that we have remaining, and I want to honor what you shared. One, I think the heavy lift comes from not just the production of the plan and what I'm doing to get candidates and elected officials to publicly declare their support of it and their plan to implement it, and to get other influencers in the community and community organizations to declare their support of it. Others need to be meeting with elected officials, Republicans, to present the plan to them. They don't know what we want. They think we want what they've been told we want, a welfare state and handouts and all that kind of stuff. First of all, reparations is not a handout. Our wealth has been held for 400 years. We are demanding a distribution of that held wealth, right? And the promise that was made to us by the federal government for the repair of our ancestors, that was not delivered then. They let them all die out by the 1980s. And now we are standing in their place in order to get what was due, right? Because it has been not just withheld from lost wages, lost freedom from slavery, as Dr. Sandy Darity and his group of researchers have calculated. It's also been an ongoing and continued lack of implementation, full implementation and protection of our citizenship and civil rights. So, but the heavy lift is really people developing relationships where they are and using the plan if they feel inclined to start those conversations with people who haven't heard from us in a really long time. And what I mean is Republicans. Democrats know how to do targeted interventions for communities. Look at what they are doing with the Office of New Americans, right? Look at what these people do when they meet with any other constituent group. They don't say that constituent group and freedmen and Black Americans, like Black Americans are always talking about Black and brown and a whole list of other people. They know how to do it. They just don't want to. And the other thing I want to say is how this hooks to and into conservative values is how can one support family values, which Republicans care about, and support the routine incarceration of fathers and mothers, the abuse of people at the hand of authority, right? How do you support small government and limited government impact and not take a look at how government's negligence, as well as broken windows policing, which came out of New York, stop and frisk, actually affects the development of children, their mental health. Look at what happened to, may he rest in peace, our brother Khalif, right? And what happened to him. So I think what we need to do is clarify for people and for ourselves what the values the different parties and factions of parties say they are about, and how those values are demonstrated by them supporting what we need in our community.
Absolutely.
So those are some things that I want to say. And when I look at the Democratic Party, I see extreme pursuit of all these liberties, let's just say, without a sense of the impact of what they are doing. And I think you look at open borders, for example, making everyone a minority, for example, and that affecting the civil rights, Negro civil rights, because let's face it, it was Black people that were getting hung up and strung up that caused the civil rights movement, right? And having to sit at the back of the bus. That was us. But now everybody, including white men, can be considered a minority if they deviate from, heterosexuality, for example, right? Or if you have some extraneous religious belief and there's like 12 of y'all, suddenly you're a religious minority. So all of these ways that our experience was supposed to be repaired, the left, Democrats, have pushed their own agendas onto us, and it's negatively affected us. So look at those values on the right and find those spaces in your own words about our experience that connects with them, because I think they're more there on the right than they are on the left. And I just think people aren't used to having that conversation because we've written the loud, racist, or just ignorant and having stereotypical beliefs about Black people, we've written that part of the right off as if it's the whole party. And I can tell you from my own experiences, there is that contingent in the party, but most of the people I interact with are good people. And many of them nowadays are very willing to hold racists accountable for their ignorance.
Well, we need to find them. Bring them on out.
Build those relationships is what I
Yeah.
can tell you. I don't know how much time we have, but I will tell you this one story.
Go ahead, tell the story. We're sort of winding down.
Yeah, no worries.
Go ahead.
So to exemplify what you were saying, what we were just talking about, I had a very interesting experience recently at a meeting with a candidate. And it was really obvious I didn't appreciate what he was saying. It was obvious to me that a few people around the room didn't appreciate what this person was saying. Long story short, the very next day, I got lots of calls from very connected people who are in leadership positions in the party. The very next day after that, there was an op-ed written calling for that person's campaign and condemning that person's statements and saying quite clearly that racism has no place in our party. I was asked to help develop some clarity around what that looks like moving forward, to clarify that in the platform. And to float that up to the state to see what that can look like. That wouldn't have happened for several reasons, including if I hadn't been in the room, right? So I showed up all by my little self because, I mean, where I fit in, where I get in. And because I had already developed relationships with friends who I'd met for coffee after I attended meetings last year, who were willing to go to bat for me and felt offended because of what that person said, right? So develop those relationships. It really matters.
No, that's powerful. And it really reminds me of a friend of mine who is very politically connected here. And has always worked, like I said, I'm a lifelong Democratic voter. And I have over the years, I'll put it like this. At this point, it's all about the local officials. And right now I have very good ones and I'm happy about that. But this person had worked to open doors for Democratic candidates and for years. A Republican candidate from upstate New York asked that person to do the same type of work for their campaign. Out of all the time that person had spent working on behalf of Democrats, never did they compensate this person in the manner in which that person who was a Republican, and actually, in my opinion, I'm not in my district, but well respected person, compensated this person for the wealth of information, the platform for the Black community that this person brought to that candidate. And that's a huge departure because it speaks to how we have been largely taken for granted by the Democratic Party. And what you're just sharing about those who are Republicans as well in that room with you were offended like you and for you and went to bat for you. That's the sense of allyship that we actually need. And I think the word is being used too loosely.
Yes.
We're really not getting anything that really moves our people, our community forward. And that's what we are looking for. And that's what we need, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I would reframe that. And I would say that's patriotism. You cannot be an anti-Black bigot and be a patriot. You don't appreciate and understand the trajectory of this nation and what has made it a more perfect union if you are hateful toward freedmen. And I would say that what you just mentioned is a demonstration. Democrats do not have a plan for our economic uplift.
No.
They do not.
They don't.
Republicans are about that economic independence and business development and professional development, particularly, but personal development is an inherent part of that. Democrats need Black people, I think, to be dependent and struggling. And if we are to get repaired by the right, particularly, we would save so much money in the long term by launching the Freedmen's Bureau for the targeted things that I mentioned in my tweet today
Mhm.
about what that could look like, because it wouldn't be buckshot and thrown all over the place into programs that bring immigrants in who provide remittance to their countries. The wealth that would be poured into freedmen would stay inside America. It would stabilize our cities. It would stabilize our families. People could pay for attorneys if they ran into the wrong type of officer on a bad day,
Mhm. Yeah,
right? And mothers wouldn't have to work 2 to 3 shifts to make ends meet.
right.
Black children wouldn't have to take jobs at 16 in order to help the family. People
Family.
could pay for
Right.
counseling,
Yeah.
mental health services, investments, and we would save money in the long run by fully investing in the one group of Black people in America who've been here, who have not just earned what we are saying we need from reparations, but what has provided a lap of luxury and comfort for everybody. Reparations would completely change the landscape politically, and it would completely change the dynamic of our nation in terms of economic stability and the social safety net and the like. And
I
I
agree.
mentioned that in the All Americans First last point there.
I love it, Denise. And I'm so sorry that we don't have more time, but I
Mm.
will do another show, and we probably want to dedicate it to more reparations, because I
Mm.
think there needs to be comprehensive education around that as well. But
Yeah.
I would love to share this little funny story that I don't tell often, but I had been before the pandemic doing some real estate development down in Mississippi. So I
Mm.
was traveling back and forth. And on this one, and this is speaking to your point again, because we otherize everybody. We've been otherized, so we now otherize everybody, including Republicans. But I was meeting with these county leaders, all of which, except for one, was Republican. You know, and it was so funny. It's sort of comical to me. I typically wear braids. I
Mm.
typically wear braids. I'm too busy. I don't have time for all the hair stuff. So I twisted out my hair tonight because it's getting warm. But I'm down there. I usually wear braids, but this time I had taken my hair out. And the humidity, we know about the humidity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how it loves our hair. It made my hair, I just had to brush it down and make it very conservative, right? Instead of the
Mm.
braids. And I had not even forethought this. Um, Coming from New York, they knew I was coming from New York. So already there are these stigmas attached to New Yorkers, especially if you're a Black New Yorker and you're coming with braids, people just don't know. So they might
Mm.
have thought I was like this super radical, which I am, but that was not the point there, right? Um, so I go in and I know what I'm talking about. And by the time I leave this meeting, I have these Republicans from Mississippi, and we know the legacy of Mississippi, pledging to turn over 16 acres of land for me to help them develop.
Nice.
And I'm saying that to say and reinforce your point. If we never seek them out and present to them what we need from them as electeds,
Mm-hmm.
they represent us too, whether we like them or not. They
Absolutely.
represent us too. So I think that if nothing else, and I know I'm going to catch flack, I don't really care, because I'm tired of us being at the bottom rung, right? I'm
Mm.
tired of us being at the bottom rung. And so if you put me in a room with a Democrat over here on the right and a Republican on the left, and I'm putting your 3-point plan or any other plan that benefits the Black community before them, and I'm hearing a lot of hemming and hawing over here, and I'm hearing some, you know what, we may have a way to do at
Absolutely.
least this one. Let's try to do number two before we look at number one or number three. If I get that from the person on the left who happens to be a Republican, as opposed to I don't think we can do this because of these factors and that factor, guess what? I'm there to strike a deal And if this is where the deal can be made, I think this is where we as a people have to move. Would you agree with that? Am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. And the one thing I would say to add to that is what you'll also hear, and Joe Biden said this recently to, what's his name? Ed Gordon, I think it is how you say his name, that, oh, I'd support reparations if it includes Native Americans. Well,
Right.
it's not going to include Native Americans. It is for descendants of slaves only, because Native Americans also owe us reparations. And they already have their own office, and they already don't pay taxes, and they have already received billions. This is for descendants of slaves. I think we need to say that with our whole chest.
Absolutely.
The other piece of that is we don't go into negotiations letting people pick apart our plan. What we do say is, this is the plan. I would like to see these things implemented on day one, these things implemented within the first year, these things implemented here or there. You tell people and you negotiate. We don't offer people a blank slate. It's a whole plan, right? And all of the things need to be implemented.
Right.
The other thing I want to clarify about the plans is it is rooted in my stance as a Republican and the values that I feel our party stands for and what all of America needs. I ain't doing the, what's the thing Kamala said about ships and raising everybody all tides. And I can't even think of it because it don't even make no sense. Okay. We're talking about specificity because this buckshot approach that we have used ain't working and it's wasting money. So with the All Americans First element of the plan, the third point right there is I talk about how immigration has affected all of America. White America has been sold a bill of goods by people telling them that illegal immigration is only affecting Black America. That's a whole lie. If you haven't read Back of the Hiring Line by Roy Beck, please read it. Immigration, both legal and illegal, has affected Americans, period. It has. Our wealth has gone down. Immigration has affected the number of pensions that are available or the lack thereof. I'm going to plug my phone in while I'm talking, or the lack thereof. Roy outlines that in his book. Not just Black people had pensions. All Americans had pensions. How many people retire from the same company right now? Okay, that ain't just Black folk, that's all Americans. When we say the middle class has been gutted and wages have been depressed, that ain't just Black Americans, that's all Americans. So there are ways that people sell white America some mess by trying to make it sound like it's a small problem that only affects us. It is all Americans. So that All Americans First plan also talks extensively about specific actions to limit legal migration and illegal migration.
You know what? And I do believe we actually need to have maybe 2 more times together. And my brother, Reverend Osiris, Dr. Osiris Inhotep, he wants me to connect you to. I don't know if you're on Twitter, but she does have her Twitter handle right there. Dr.
Yeah, reach out.
Sorry.
My DMs are open on Twitter for sure, and you can make an introduction on Twitter if he's having a hard time with it.
I'll definitely do that. He's a great guy. He probably knows who I was talking about too, in terms of the Republican politician.
Gotcha.
He's in another county. New York City is a beast, but everything else is different. But yes, I think we probably need to have a show on immigration, because for those of you who are not on Twitter, there have been so many discussions around immigration, and I think it needs to be fleshed out. I can definitely tell you in New York, we are, and I put this tweet up the other day, because I'm not going to be, I'm not anti-immigrants. I'm just not. But I think that there is some value in what you just said. And so something you posted today made me start looking at our immigration laws here, the federal immigration laws. And I think people need to look at the federal immigration laws that our legislators, our state senate, our U.S. senators, and our U.S. congressmen are deciding on our behalf. Like you sort of got into, but not fully, the entire Civil Rights Act was made for Blacks, right? It includes everybody now. And even the way the equal employment opportunity act
Yeah.
is so we need to have this conversation so that, Denise, people can understand why you're so strong when you say that. Because in New York, where we are, most people are going to be like, oh, she's anti. No, she's not. She's
Mm.
telling you why. I have a I have someone who is dear to me, who is, I'm not lying, and I don't think this is unique, who is dear to me, who's still working and is almost 80 years old. That's
Wow.
what Denise is talking about.
It's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon, but it should be, right? And
Oh,
so,
absolutely.
I know I'm preaching to the choir when I speak that to you,
No.
but I think it's an education. I'm telling you, I've been seeing these spaces in Twitter about immigration. I'm like, you know what? I know from my perspective here in New York, we are truly a melting pot in New York. And yes, there are people who are from other countries who show they don't like Black Americans for whatever reason, but they're here in our country, right? Um, and I know it goes on and on, but I really think that we need to educate people around the laws. And I know that your 3-point plan has actually considered the
Mm.
laws that are on the books. And I think I would love to have another conversation with you real soon
Yeah.
about that and reparations.
I am happy to have both of those conversations. And I know we are winding down, winding down.
We
So
are.
here are a couple things I'd offer. I have a podcast that I sporadically upload to because I'm also finishing a dissertation, y'all. 3 chapters written, but you know the process, the editing and the craziness and all the things. Anyway, I have a Spotify podcast that I occasionally upload to. It's called The Social Contagion, Denise Long. I hosted a 13-hour Twitter Space book review, interactive book review with the community on Twitter with Roy Beck. The first session of that is up there. So go take a listen to that. It'll be informative. Check out Roy's book. He has an audio book, which I enjoyed. And I want to just say, I feel no compulsion to champion immigration. There are 7 billion people in this world. And many of those people live in poverty. We cannot reasonably bring over even a tenth of those people. There are ways that we, if we should choose to, and if we have the resources to, support those people in the development of their own country, and maybe bring some people here who we have a need for. But right now, with there being 2 million people who had contact with our law enforcement at the border just during Biden's administration, imagine how many people are in this country that just came through. Those people aren't just working in fields, picking lettuce and tomatoes and all of that kind of stuff, like they often tell you. Those people are working in manufacturing plants in the heart of Mississippi, where descendants of slaves aren't getting those jobs. Those people are working at processing plants in Chicago, where descendants of slaves and Black Americans whose families came out of chains in this country aren't getting those jobs. Those people are breaking laws and taking your jobs without any sense of guilt about the fact that you're unemployed. So I give as I get. And I don't feel a compulsion to champion immigration. I feel that people should be handled with care in a trauma sensitive way. We don't have to hurt or harm people, but I don't feel the need to champion immigration. I just don't. And if that hits people some kind of way, then I'm just not the person for them to be engaged with.
No, I think it has to. I'm telling you, some of these discussions have not been had, and
Mm.
they need to be. I don't know if you saw my tweet today. It was a. It speaks to what you're talking about. So there's a young lady who's 28, and I believe in 2019, during the time when ICE was rounding up
Mm.
people,
Illegal
immigrants,
migrants.
illegal
Hmm.
migrants from wherever, they had,
Right.
they
They
were
were all
raised.
over.
That's what they call them. They call them raids.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess whatever. They were raised, ICE raids, in 2019, and this occurred in Monroe, South Carolina.
Mm.
And just go and check it. It's crazy. I just happened to see it today. Um, and it's probably like one of the few tweets I made today. Anyway,
Okay.
in Monroe, South Carolina. So she was one of the people. She was deported back to Guatemala, but she made her way back. She re-entered after being deported.
Many
So
of them do.
yeah, sure. And I don't know. I mean, the article that I read, and I read several, I did not see the details about like trying to get back to her children or anything like that. But she came back and she's now in a detention center in Georgia. So the advocates, immigration advocates in South Carolina reached out to who? Benny Thompson. He's the chair. He's the congressman who is the chair, Mississippi. I'm sorry. Did I say South Carolina?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. I have Jim Clyburn on the brain. Mississippi. He is the head of the chair of the Homeland Security Committee in the House of Representatives. So they reached out to him to reach out to ICE to have her released. She has COVID. She's had COVID by now. She's alive, so she's probably through with COVID, but she has kidney failure, so she's sick. So he actually did that. So I went and I'm doing, like I told you, I'm doing my report card on the CBC. He is in District 2. There's a Republican congressman in District 3 where Monroe, Mississippi is. So actually, he's just using his authority as the committee chair to ask for this one person who actually broke our laws to come back in. You know, she was deported and she re-entered.
And she stole jobs from descendants of slaves in the heart of Mississippi. Yeah, when you said Monroe, South Carolina, I was like, okay, that's because I remember that's 700. Wasn't it 700 jobs between the 3 or 4 chicken processing
there are
plants?
3. Yep.
700 in Mississippi.
And on top of it, so I did my little quick research, right? So Benny Thompson, District 2, it does not include Monroe, but the Coke, I guess it's Coke. It's not the Koch brothers, guys.
Right.
Coke food chicken plant. They have disenfranchised Black farmers. And I honestly could not find anywhere recently. They filed a lawsuit, ironically, in also 2019 when she was arrested along with others. I couldn't find where Benny Thompson has advocated for the Black farmers at all. His district is 65% Black, 31% white, and 1.9% Hispanic. But yet he intervened on her behalf. It's wrong. And I want the Blacks to wake up and stop voting for people. But we have this proximity of influence syndrome. We like it that he is the chair of the Homeland Security Committee and he's running the January 6th hearings and everything. Put that aside, but what is he doing in your community when they are also poverty stricken, you know, and they are at the top of the list? Because we already know that Mississippi is one of the poorest states, is the poorest in the nation. So
it has been for a long time.
And it has been for a long time. And so when you speak about that and not having any advocacy, I'm not saying I advocate for immigration, period, especially, and this won't set well with many of your Republican counterparts, especially with this Ukrainian war. I feel so offended. I'm so offended. And I knew that when he said, when Zelensky said, we're going to go because obviously we could talk all night. When he said he needed $7 billion a month, I knew that it was going to take President Biden a week or two to come out with another ask, that they all seem to be too ready to give this $33 billion. Setting up, as you said, we have no pensions over here anymore, setting up pensions for the Ukrainians.
Is that not the biggest ping and not having the courtesy to call it rain as I've ever seen? And so everybody needs to be absolutely smashing their keyboards and phone calls to let him and his administration and your senator, both, not just your national, but you also need to let the folks at your state level and your local level know, if this goes through, I'm voting you out as well.
Yeah.
Make them put pressure
Oh,
on
yeah.
these people. It is insane. And please stop feeling a compulsion to take care of the world. You, as a Black American freedman, are not under any obligation to set yourself on fire so other people can see. Do
Right.
not let people use you to get elected.
Right.
I'm sorry. I can't see myself championing people who knowingly come here to steal jobs from freedmen, the people who built this nation, and they maltreat the Black folk in their own home countries. You think they're going to come here and suddenly give a care about you?
Right.
Child.
No, this has been really good. This has been really good. And we will have I hope that we can schedule another one really soon
Absolutely.
to talk about both those issues because they're real. It's really an education thing because no, we have not cared about each other enough to demand our reparations. And I think it was Frederick Douglass that said power concedes nothing. No, power what? What is his quote?
I think the
Power,
idea is you got to take this ish that you
yeah.
want, ask for it, let
Mhm.
people know that you need it, and power concedes nothing without a
Without
demand,
demand.
right?
Yes,
And
yes,
people
yes.
aren't going to come and offer you a golden parachute when you've been framed as and positioned as liking the position that you
That
have.
you're in. Yeah,
So
absolutely. We
raise
got to
some
give
hell.
and that's why on this second anniversary I have shifted again because it's not a total shift, it's just more clarity. It's about what we deserve, and I cannot be anyone with a monicum of influence who doesn't tell our people that we have to go and make demands for what we have been owed and what our ancestors were owed and are owed through our living. So
Amen.
Denise, it's been so great having you here. And I
Thank you.
can't wait until we can reschedule. And I pray that you'll get more people to hear your 3 point plan and that it will take root throughout the country because I think it's a good one. I really do. I think it's a good one. And I thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you soon.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. I'm taking off next week, but I will have a pre-recorded interview for you. You don't want to miss it. I will tweet it out at the end of the week. God bless you all and come back again next time. Denise, hold on a minute, okay?
Okay.